the false dawn of Peace the Victory that never was, Admiral Zeph Karath stood on the command deck of the mighty Kethran flagship Eternal Dominion, watching the final moments of the longest war in galactic history. Through the massive viewports, the debris of the last Vorthan defense fleet drifted like dying stars against the cosmic void. After 150 years of brutal conflict that had consumed entire star systems and claimed billions of lives, the Kethran Empire had finally achieved total victory over the rebellious Vorthan colonies. The bridge hummed with the sounds of triumph. Dozens of Kethran officers, their scaled skin gleaming under the artificial lights, worked at their stations with practiced efficiency. Their reptilian features bore expressions of satisfaction as reports streamed in from across the fleet. 300 warships floated in perfect formation around what remained of the Vorthan stronghold of Nexus Prime, the last bastion of resistance in a war that had defined generations. Admiral called Commander THYSS, her younger scales still bright with the enthusiasm of recent graduation from the Imperial War Academy. We're receiving final surrender signals from the remaining Vorthan vessels. Their Supreme Commander Kale Vexen is requesting terms. Karatha's amber eyes focused on the tactical display where the elegant silver ships of the Vorthans hung motionless in space. Once, those vessels had been the terror of Imperial space, their advanced shield technology and superior maneuverability making them formidable opponents. But even their technological advantages couldn't withstand the relentless industrial might of the Kethran war machine. Years of grinding attrition had worn down their fleet until only a handful of ships remained. The war had begun over a simple dispute about mining rights in the Outer Rim territories. The Vorthans, with their tall, pale frames and large dark eyes, had been among the Empire's most successful colony species. Their natural intelligence and adaptability had made them valuable citizens for centuries. But when rare quantum crystals were discovered in their home system, Imperial policies changed. The Kethrans demanded increasing tributes while restricting Vorthan autonomy. When the colonies finally rebelled, what should have been a minor police action erupted into a galactic war. There will be no terms, Karath declared, his voice carrying the authority of absolute victory. 150 years of rebellion ends today. The Vorthans will accept complete integration into the Empire, or they will join their dead among the void. As if summoned by his words, Supreme Commander Kale Vexen's image materialized on the main communication screen. The Vorthan leader appeared exactly as intelligence reports had described, tall and lean, with the characteristic pale skin and large, expressive eyes of his species. But where once those eyes had burned with the fire of revolution, now they held only the weariness of inevitable defeat. Admiral Karath, Vexen said, his voice carrying the melodic undertones typical of Vorthan speech. We acknowledge our defeat. Our military forces are broken. Our colonies lie in ruins. We ask only that you show mercy to our civilian populations. Before Karath could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the bridge. Commander THYSS's scales shifted to the pale coloration that indicated extreme stress as she processed incoming data from the sensor arrays. Admiral, she called out, her voice tight with confusion, we're detecting massive energy signatures emerging from hyperspace. Unknown configuration, power levels beyond our measurement capabilities. The holographic display shifted to show the edge of the star system, where space itself seemed to be tearing open. But these weren't the clean dimensional folds of Kethran hyperspace technology or the quantum ripples of Vorthan jump drives. These tears in reality pulsed with chaotic energy that sent waves of exotic radiation cascading across the system. How many vessels? Karath demanded, his celebration forgotten as ancient warrior instincts took over. Difficult to determine, sir. The energy interference is unlike anything in our databases. The signatures keep changing as if the ships themselves are adapting to our scans. THYSS paused, her compound eyes reflecting the data streams. Wait, I'm reading 47 distinct contacts. No, 52. They're definitely ships, but the configurations are impossible. Through the dimensional tears came vessels unlike anything either the Kethrans or Vorthans had ever encountered. They were angular and asymmetrical, bearing the scars of countless battles. Their hulls showed a patchwork of different technologies, as if they had been built from salvaged materials and desperate innovation rather than careful engineering. Some appeared to be constructed from the remains of other ships, while others bore designs that seemed to follow no logical pattern. "Are they void wraith constructs?" whispered one of the junior officers, referring to the legendary machine intelligences that supposedly haunted the galaxy's outer rim. "No," Supreme Commander Vexen said, his image still displayed on the communication screen. His large eyes had widened with something that might have been recognition. "These are something entirely different. The largest of the unknown vessels, a massive battleship that dwarfed even the Imperial flagship, began transmitting on standard galactic frequencies. The signal was primitive by current standards, using electromagnetic radiation rather than quantum entanglement or neural networks. This is General Elena Vasquez of the Terran Defense Force vessel Indomitable," came a voice that was unmistakably alien, yet strangely compelling. "We've been monitoring your conflict for some time. Congratulations on your victory, Admiral Karath. Our condolences on your defeat, Commander Vexen." Karatha's scaled features twisted in confusion. "Terran? I am unfamiliar with this species designation." "That's because your databases don't include information about us," General Vasquez replied with what sounded like dry amusement. "We call ourselves humans, and we're what you might consider new arrivals to this part of the galaxy." The human commander's image replaced Vexen's on the communication screen, and the effect on both bridge crews was immediate. General Vasquez appeared to be bipedal like many species, but her features were unlike anything in the galactic databases. Her skin was a warm brown color with no bioluminescent properties. Her hair was dark and appeared to be some kind of natural fiber covering. Most unsettling to the reptilian Kethrans, she showed her teeth when she spoke, a gesture that in their culture indicated aggressive intent. "How long have you been observing us?" Commander Vexen asked, his image reappearing in a split-screen display alongside the human. "About 75 of your standard years," Vasquez replied casually. "We've been studying your languages, your technologies, your military tactics. Fascinating conflict, really. We've never seen two civilizations maintain such intensity of warfare for so long while still maintaining their basic infrastructure." Commander THYSS's scales rippled with alarm as she processed this information. "Admiral, if they've been observing undetected for 7 decades, their stealth capabilities must be incredibly advanced." "Advanced is a relative term," Vasquez said, apparently monitoring their communications. "We just approach things differently than you do. See, while you two have been fighting each other, we've been dealing with our own problems. The Devourers nearly wiped us out about 40 years ago. Then there was the Shadow War with the entity that called itself the Harvester. After that, we had to deal with invasion attempts from 3 different dimensions simultaneously." The casual way she described what sounded like multiple Extinction-level conflicts sent chills through both alien command crews. Wars with entities from other dimensions were the stuff of ancient legends, not modern military reports. "You survived conflicts with extra-dimensional entities?" Vexen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "That should be impossible. Our science indicates that beings from parallel realities would be incompatible with our universe's physical laws." "Difficult, not impossible," Vasquez corrected, "though we did lose half our fleet and about 3 billion people figuring out how to fight something that exists partially outside normal space-time. The key is making our reality more inconvenient for them than their own." Admiral Korath struggled to process this information. His species had evolved from pack hunters, and their military doctrine emphasized overwhelming force applied through superior numbers and coordination. The idea of defeating enemies through what sounded like conceptual warfare was beyond his comprehension. "Why reveal yourselves now?" he demanded. "If you've been watching for 75 years, why intervene at the moment of Imperial victory?" General Vasquez's expression grew serious, and when she spoke, Her voice carried an authority that made both alien commanders unconsciously straighten their postures. Because your war is about to become the least of your problems. Our long-range sensors have detected something approaching this sector, something that makes your century-and-a-half conflict look like a minor disagreement between neighbors. She gestured, and the communication screen displayed tactical data that made both commanders step back in shock. The readings showed a massive fleet moving through hyperspace toward their position. The ships were organic in appearance, twisted and wrong in ways that hurt to perceive directly. The Shuttle hive, Vexen whispered, his face draining of what little color it normally possessed. But they were contained beyond the void barrier. The ancient treaties were broken about 8 months ago, Vasquez confirmed. Something shattered the containment fields. They've already consumed 12 star systems on their way here, growing stronger with each world they devour. At current velocity, they'll reach this sector in approximately 68 hours. Admiral Karatha's strategic mind immediately grasped the implications. The Shuttle were legendary parasites, ancient beings that fed on the life force of entire civilizations. According to historical records, they had been contained beyond the galaxy's edge for over 10,000 years by technologies that were barely understood by modern science. Our combined fleets cannot stand against the Shuttle, he said. Finally, even working together, the Empire and the Vorthans lack the resources to mount an effective defense. We've spent too much strength fighting each other. You're thinking like prey, General Vasquez interrupted. That's your first mistake. The Shuttle are apex predators in their own ecosystem, but they've never encountered humans before. We've developed very specific techniques for dealing with overwhelming threats. What kind of techniques? Commander THYSS asked, her scientific curiosity overriding military protocol. Vasquez's smile returned. But this time it carried a predatory edge that made even the battle-hardened Kethrans uncomfortable. The kind that come from being the galaxy's most persistent survivors. There's something you should understand about humans, Admiral. We're not the strongest species or the smartest or the most technologically advanced. But we have one trait that's kept us alive through everything the universe has thrown at us, which is, Karath asked despite himself, we're absolutely terrible at knowing when we're supposed to give up. Before either commander could respond, new alarms began sounding across both fleets. The human vessels were moving, but not in any formation either alien species recognized. Instead of maintaining battle lines or defensive positions, the Terran ships scattered in seemingly random directions, their movement patterns chaotic and unpredictable. What are they doing? Karath muttered, watching the tactical display with growing confusion. Preparing, Vasquez replied simply, Admiral Karath, Commander Vexen, you have a choice. You can continue your war while the Shuttle consume everything you've been fighting for, or you can trust the species that's been specifically trained by an uncaring universe to survive impossible situations. She paused, her image flickering as electromagnetic interference from the human ships increased. Either way, the Shuttle arrive in 67 hours and 43 minutes. I suggest you decide quickly. The communication cut out, leaving both alien commanders staring at empty screens while the human fleet continued its incomprehensible maneuvers around them. The war that had defined a century and a half was over, but something far more dangerous was about to begin. In the silence that followed, Admiral Korath looked at the image of his ancient enemy and realized that everything he thought he knew about warfare was about to change forever. The galaxy had found its most unlikely guardians, and they were nothing like anyone had expected. The celebration of victory had lasted exactly 17 minutes. Now, as the first reports of human fleet movements reached both command centers, Korath understood that the real war was just beginning. And for the first time in his long military career, he wasn't sure if they could win. But something in General Vasquez's voice, in the casual way she had discussed fighting impossible enemies, gave him a flicker of hope. Perhaps these humans, these self-proclaimed survivors, might know something about victory that the galaxy had forgotten in its long centuries of civilized warfare. The question was whether there would be enough time to learn before the shuttle arrived to consume them all. When Titans fall the council of desperate allies, the emergency council chamber aboard the neutral space station convergence point had never hosted such an unlikely gathering. Hastily constructed from salvaged materials from both the Kethrin and Vorthan fleets, the station served as a meeting ground between three species who, mere hours before, had been strangers or enemies. The chamber itself reflected this rushed cooperation. Kethrin geometric architecture blended awkwardly with Vorthan bioorganic designs, while human modifications added a distinctly practical, almost crude functionality to the space. Admiral Zeph Koroth found himself seated across from Commander Kale Vexen, a situation that would have been unthinkable just days earlier. Between them sat General Elena Vasquez, her small frame somehow commanding attention from beings twice her size. The human leader moved with an easy confidence that both alien commanders found unsettling, as if she had faced similar desperate situations so many times that they had become routine. The shuttle operate on biological assimilation principles, explained Dr. James Chun, the human fleet's chief xenobiologist. His appearance was even more disturbing to the aliens than General Vasquez's, pale skin stretched over a thin frame, with eyes that seemed to analyze everything with clinical detachment. They don't just consume matter like traditional parasites. They absorb the life force itself, the essential energy that animates consciousness. Once they've drained a world, they can replicate the biological patterns of every species they've consumed. Commander THYSS, who had been granted permission to attend as the Kethrin Empire's senior xenobiologist, gestured toward the tactical displays showing long-range sensor data. Our historical records indicate the shuttle were contained using quantum barrier technology that we no longer understand. How did they break free? Dr. Chen's expression grew grim as he activated a holographic projection. According to our observations, something attacked the barrier from the outside. We detected massive energy discharges approximately 8 months ago, followed by a complete collapse of the containment field. Whatever broke them out was powerful enough to shatter technology that had held for 10,000 years. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. If the shuttle had allies capable of breaking ancient containments, the situation was far worse than anyone had imagined. What exactly are we facing? Asked Dr. Nira Voss, the Vorthan expedition's chief scientist. Her tall, pale frame trembled slightly as she processed the sensor data. Our databases contain only fragments about the shuttle. Most records were deliberately destroyed after the containment. General Vasquez stood and walked to the central display, her movements drawing all eyes. According to our research, the shuttle aren't just another hostile species. Their evolution's answer to the question of what happens when survival instinct completely overrides everything else. They've existed for millions of years by consuming civilizations and adding their strengths to their own collective. She manipulated the holographic controls, revealing detailed scans of the approaching enemy fleet. The ships were unlike anything in known space, organic growths that pulsed with malevolent life, their surfaces covered in what appeared to be living tissue. Some vessels showed clear signs of technological integration, as if they had absorbed and merged with captured starships from previous conquests. They're not just ships, Dr. Chin continued. They're organisms, living, thinking creatures the size of cities, each one containing the absorbed knowledge and abilities of every species they've encountered. When they consume a civilization, they don't just take resources, they take everything that made that civilization unique. Admiral Koroth's scaled features twisted in disgust and fear. His species understood predation, but this was something far beyond natural hunting. How many civilizations have they absorbed? Conservative estimate? Several thousand, Vasquez replied. They've been moving through the galaxy for eons, consuming everything in their path. The only reason they were stopped before was that the ancients, whoever they were, managed to trap them beyond the galactic barrier before they could reach the core systems. Commander Vexen leaned forward, his large eyes reflecting the horrific images on the display. You said something broke them out. Do we know what? "We have theories," Dr. Chin said carefully. "Our deep space monitoring stations detected artificial quantum signatures during the barrier collapse. Someone or something with technology beyond current galactic standards deliberately freed the shuttle. The question is why?" The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Not only were they facing an ancient horror that had consumed thousands of civilizations, but someone had intentionally unleashed it upon the galaxy. "There's something else," General Vasquez said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "The shuttle's movement pattern isn't random. They're not just consuming everything in their path. They're heading specifically toward this sector, toward the aftermath of your war." Commander THYSS's scales shifted to the pale coloration of extreme stress. "They're following the energy signatures of the conflict. A century and a half of warfare would have left quantum resonance patterns throughout this entire region." Like a dinner bell, Vasquez confirmed grimly, "War-weakened civilizations are apparently their preferred prey. They've learned that species exhausted by conflict are easier to consume." Admiral Koroth slammed his clawed hand against the table, his frustration boiling over. "This is precisely what they wanted. Whoever freed them knew we would be vulnerable. After the war, we've been manipulated." Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the station. The sensor technicians, a mix of all three species working together for the first time, called out readings that sent waves of panic through the chamber. Shuttle Advance scouts detected, reported Lieutenant Sarah Park, General Vasquez's tactical officer. 3 vessels emerging from hyperspace ahead of schedule. Estimated arrival in 22 minutes. The main display shifted to show the approaching threat. The Shuttle scouts were smaller than the main fleet, but still massive by conventional standards. Each one was roughly the size of a Kethran battlecruiser, their organic surfaces pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that hurt to look at directly. All defensive positions. Admiral Koroth began his military training taking over. "Belay that order," General Vasquez interrupted, her voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority. "Admiral, with respect, everything you're about to do will get your people killed faster." "Then what do you suggest?" Koroth demanded, his amber eyes flashing with anger and desperation. Vasquez turned to the communications array and began issuing orders in rapid-fire human language. The alien translation systems struggled to keep up with the technical jargon and cultural references, but the results were immediately visible on the tactical displays. The human ships began moving in patterns that violated every principle of space combat both alien species had ever learned. Instead of forming defensive lines, they accelerated directly toward the incoming Shuttle scouts. Instead of maintaining formation integrity, they scattered into individual attack runs that seemed to follow no coordinated plan. "This is madness," Commander Vexen whispered, watching as the relatively small human vessels raced toward enemies that outmassed them by orders of magnitude. "No," Dr. Chin corrected, his eyes fixed on the tactical readings. "This is adaptive warfare. The Shuttle operate on consumption algorithms optimized for predictable prey behavior. What our people are doing right now is creating a tactical scenario the Shuttle's biological programming can't efficiently process." The first Shuttle scout ship fully materialized from hyperspace, its organic hull rippling with predatory hunger. It immediately began scanning the system, cataloging threats and resources according to its ancient instincts. The readings it received defied comprehension. Prey species were charging directly at it instead of fleeing or forming defensive positions. The human vessel Relentless struck first, not with conventional weapons, but with something the aliens had never seen before. Energy beams lanced out from the ship, but instead of causing physical damage, they seemed to attack the Shuttle vessel's life force directly. Biodisruptor technology, Dr. Chen explained to the stunned observers. "We developed it fighting the harvesters. It doesn't damage matter, it disrupts the quantum patterns that hold organic consciousness together." The effect on the Shuttle scout was immediate and terrifying. The massive creature writhed in space, its bioluminescent patterns shifting to colors that indicated agony and confusion. For the first time in millions of years, it experienced something it couldn't simply absorb and overcome. But the other two scouts adapted quickly, their organic intelligence learning from their companions' distress. They began shifting their molecular structure, becoming less organic and more crystalline, making them resistant to the biodisruptors. They're adapting, Lieutenant Park reported, her voice tight with concern. Biodisruptors are losing effectiveness. Expected, General Vasquez replied calmly. Phase 2. All units, implement pattern Delta 7. The human ships suddenly changed tactics completely. Instead of continuing their biodisruptor attacks, they began firing conventional weapons, but in patterns that made no tactical sense. Some ships fired at empty space, others targeted their own allies' positions. Still others seemed to be shooting randomly at cosmic debris. What are they doing? Admiral Karoff demanded, his strategic mind unable to process what he was seeing. Creating chaos, Dr. Chen answered. The Shatel's greatest strength is their ability to absorb and understand everything they encounter. But they can't absorb patterns that have no logical structure. We're not fighting them, we're confusing them. The effect was remarkable. The two adapted Shatel scouts, faced with completely irrational behavior from their prey, began hesitating. Their million-year-old instincts had no framework for dealing with enemies who acted randomly. While they paused to process this unprecedented situation, the human ships closed to point-blank range. What happened next would be studied by military academies for generations. The human vessel Determination, piloted by Captain Lisa Rodriguez, flew directly into the mouth of the largest Shatel scout. As the organic vessel tried to consume the human ship, Rodriguez detonated what Dr. Chen later described as a consciousness bomb, a weapon that released pure, concentrated human stubbornness in quantum form. The Shatel scout, suddenly forced to experience the concept of absolute refusal to surrender, suffered what could only be described as an existential crisis. Its ancient consciousness, which had never encountered a prey species that simply refused to be consumed, shut down completely. The remaining scout attempted to retreat, but the human ships had anticipated this. The vessel Unbreakable intercepted it not with weapons, but with a quantum transmission that contained every human war song, battle cry, and declaration of defiance ever recorded. The Shatel scout, overwhelmed by the sheer concentrated force of human determination, simply stopped functioning. It hung motionless in space, its bioluminescent patterns dim and confused. The entire engagement had lasted less than 7 minutes. 3 supposedly invincible Shatel scouts had been neutralized by forces a fraction of their size, using tactics that shouldn't have been possible. How? Commander Vexen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. General Vasquez turned to face the assembled alien commanders, her expression mixing triumph with grim determination. Because we've learned something that apparently no other species in galactic history has figured out. Sometimes the only way to beat a superior enemy is to be completely, utterly unpredictable. Dr. Chun pulled up new sensor data, showing the main Shatel fleet's reaction to the loss of their scouts. They're altering course. The main fleet is accelerating, but they're also changing formation. They're adapting to our tactics already. How long until they arrive? Admiral Karoff asked. 37 hours, Lieutenant Park reported, and they're bringing reinforcements. Long-range sensors show additional bio-ships joining the fleet. Current count is over 200 vessels. The chamber fell silent as the magnitude of their situation became clear. They had won a small victory, but it had only served to anger an enemy that could learn from every encounter. We need to evacuate the civilian populations, Commander Vexen said quietly. Get as many people away from the core systems as possible. No, General Vasquez said firmly. We're not running. General, with respect, we cannot stand against 200 Shatel bio-ships, Admiral Karoff protested. Our combined fleets have perhaps 60 operational vessels after the war. Vasquez smiled, and once again her expression carried that predatory edge that made both alien commanders deeply uncomfortable. Admiral, you're still thinking like this is a conventional military engagement. The Shuttle have spent millions of years perfecting their consumption techniques against predictable prey, but they've never faced an opponent that specializes in surviving impossible situations. She gestured to the tactical display, which began showing human fleet positions throughout the system. We're not going to fight them ship to ship. We're going to do something so tactically insane that their ancient programming won't be able to process it. What exactly are you proposing? Dr. Voss asked, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. General Vasquez's smile widened. We're going to teach the galaxy's ultimate predators what it feels like to be prey. Admiral Karoth, Commander Vexen, I need you to trust human tactical doctrine completely. No questions, no modifications, no attempts to make our strategy fit your understanding of warfare. The two alien commanders exchanged glances, centuries of mutual hatred temporarily overshadowed by the recognition that their species' survival might depend on their answer. What exactly are you asking us to do? Admiral Karoth asked carefully. Something that goes against every military instinct your species have developed over thousands of years, Vasquez replied. I'm asking you to follow the tactical guidance of a species that's only been in space for a few centuries, but has somehow survived everything the universe has thrown at us. She paused, her expression growing deadly serious. Because the alternative is extinction, and humans are very, very good at making sure extinction happens to the other guy. As the two alien commanders considered their options, new alarms began sounding. The long-range sensors had detected something that changed everything once again. The main Shuttle fleet wasn't just approaching, it was growing. The bioships were consuming asteroids, space debris, and even cosmic dust to create additional vessels as they traveled. What had been 200 ships was now approaching 300, and the number continued to climb. The real war was about to begin, and humanity was about to show the galaxy what desperate people could accomplish when they refused to accept defeat. The Guardians gambit the storm before silence the combined fleet that assembled at the edge of the Kepler 438 system represented the most desperate alliance in galactic history. Kethran dreadnoughts, their angular hulls scarred by decades of warfare, flew in formation alongside Vorthan biocruisers that pulsed with organic energy. Between them moved the human vessels, smaller and seemingly fragile compared to their alien counterparts, yet carrying themselves with the confidence of predators among prey. General Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the tactical displays with the focused intensity of someone who had stared into the abyss so many times it had become familiar territory. Around her, the command center buzzed with activity as officers from 3 different species worked together to coordinate what military historians would later call the most audacious defensive strategy ever attempted. Shuttle fleet status, she requested, her voice cutting through the organized chaos. 417 vessels confirmed and still growing, reported Lieutenant Sarah Park, her fingers dancing across holographic controls. They're consuming everything in their path, asteroids, comets, even cosmic dust. At current consumption rates, they'll have over 500 bioships by the time they reach our position. Admiral Zeph Karoth's image appeared on the communication screen, his scaled features tense with barely controlled anxiety. General Vasquez, my tactical staff is requesting final confirmation of the battle plan. Even with our combined resources, we're outnumbered nearly 8-1 by enemies that have never been defeated in recorded history. Good thing we're not fighting recorded history, Vasquez replied without taking her eyes off the sensor displays. We're writing a new chapter. Commander Vexen, how are your bioships responding to the consciousness resonance modifications? The Vorthan leader's pale features flickered with uncertainty as his image joined the split-screen display. The symbiotic organisms are experiencing severe distress. The neural modifications you've requested go against millions of years of evolutionary programming. They don't understand why we're asking them to think in ways that biological consciousness was never meant to experience. Because biological consciousness is exactly what the Shuttle expect to encounter, Dr. James Chin interjected from his position at the science station. Your living ships process information through quantum neural networks that follow predictable patterns. We've temporarily altered those networks to generate thought processes that violate natural logic. Commander THYSS, now serving as liaison between the Kethrin and human tactical teams, gestured toward the approaching enemy fleet. The Shuttle have begun deploying in standard consumption formation. They're treating this as a resource harvesting operation, not a military engagement. Vasquez nodded grimly. That's exactly what we're counting on. They've analyzed our ships, calculated our capabilities, and determined optimal consumption patterns based on conventional defensive strategies. What they haven't accounted for is the possibility that we might deliberately choose to do everything wrong. She activated the fleet-wide communication system, her voice carrying to every ship in the massive formation. All vessels, this is General Vasquez. In approximately 45 minutes, we're going to implement the most tactically suicidal strategy in military history. I want everyone to understand what we're really doing here. The channel filled with the sounds of thousands of beings from 3 different species listening intently as their fate was decided. The Shuttle aren't just predators, Vasquez continued. They're the ultimate expression of evolutionary perfection through consumption. They've survived for millions of years because they've learned to counter every form of resistance they've ever encountered. They expect prey species to fight logically, to use their strengths efficiently, to make tactical decisions based on survival instincts. She paused, her gaze sweeping across her own bridge crew before continuing. But they've never encountered humans. Our species didn't evolve in safety. We didn't learn warfare from military academies or strategic simulations. We learned to survive on a world that tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. We became persistence predators, beings that win through sheer bloody-minded refusal to give up, even when logic says we should. Admiral Karatha's voice came through the communication array, carrying a note of desperate curiosity. What exactly does that mean in practical terms? Vasquez's smile was sharp enough to cut through space itself. It means we're going to show the galaxy's ultimate predators what it feels like to be hunted. The first phase of the battle began not with weapons fire or tactical maneuvering, but with something far more subtle and infinitely more dangerous. Dr. Chun had spent the past 36 hours working with teams from all 3 species to create what he called reality distortion fields, zones of space where the fundamental laws of physics became temporarily negotiable. Think of them as conceptual traps, he explained to the alien officers who were still struggling to understand human tactical philosophy. They don't damage ships directly. Instead, they make certain areas of space temporarily uncertain about how matter and energy should behave. The human ships began their approach in formations that violated every principle of space combat known to galactic civilization. Instead of maintaining defensive spacing, they clustered together in tight groups that would normally be vulnerable to area effect weapons. Instead of approaching from multiple vectors to divide enemy fire, they charged directly toward the center of the Shuttle formation in a concentrated spearhead that presented the most attractive possible target. This is beyond madness, Admiral Karath muttered, watching the tactical displays with mounting horror. They're making themselves the obvious priority target for the entire enemy fleet. Exactly, General Vasquez replied through the communication link. The Shuttle's consumption algorithms prioritize efficiency. When they see our formation, their biological programming will dedicate maximum resources to eliminating what appears to be our primary force concentration. The Shuttle fleet responded precisely as predicted. The organic vessels began converging on the human spearhead, their bioluminescent patterns shifting to colors that indicated feeding frenzy excitement. From their perspective, the prey species had made a fatal tactical error, concentrating their forces where they could be consumed most efficiently. What the Shuttle didn't realize was that the human spearhead consisted entirely of unmanned drone ships packed with reality distortion generators and Dr. Chen's newest creation, quantum paradox bombs that would force local space to experience contradictory states of existence simultaneously. The real human fleet was scattered throughout the system in individual vessels, each one hidden among asteroid clusters and debris fields, waiting for the signal to begin the most impossible military maneuver in galactic history. Initiating reality distortion in 3, 2, 1, Dr. Chen announced. What followed was an explosion unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. It wasn't the release of energy or matter, but the sudden and violent disruption of causality itself. Throughout the Shuttle formation, space began behaving according to contradictory physical laws simultaneously. In some areas, gravity flowed backward, causing the bioships to experience thrust in directions their organic drives weren't producing. In others, time moved at different rates, forcing the Shuttle to process the impossible concept that their own actions were occurring before they decided to take them. Quantum mechanics and classical physics existed in the same space, creating zones where matter could be both particle and wave, solid and energy, alive and dead, all at the same moment. The Shuttle collective consciousness, faced with sensory input that violated their fundamental understanding of reality, did what any biological intelligence would do when confronted with impossible data. They diverted massive computational resources from other functions to attempt to process the contradictions. That moment of confusion was all General Vasquez needed. All units, execute final protocol, she commanded. Throughout the system, human ships emerged from their hiding places and began implementing tactics that would have been suicide against any rational opponent. They flew directly into bioship-feeding tendrils, trusting their modified shields to protect them while they delivered consciousness viruses directly into Shuttle neural cores. They used ramming attacks not to damage enemy hulls, but to inject quantum paradoxes into organic computer systems. The Relentless, piloted by Captain Maria Santos, executed a maneuver that involved flying through the interior of a massive Shuttle bioship while releasing what Dr. Chen called existential doubt particles, quantum constructs that force the target to question its own existence at the molecular level. The determination, under Captain Rodriguez's command, used its experimental weapons to convince a cluster of bioships that they were actually located in a parallel dimension where the laws of physics worked differently, causing them to tear themselves apart trying to adapt to non-existent environmental conditions. But the most audacious maneuver belonged to General Vasquez herself. As the Shuttle command organism, a bioship the size of a small moon, began adapting to the hum. In reality distortion tactics, she piloted the Indomitable directly into its consciousness matrix. "General, that's certain death," Lieutenant Park warned, her voice tight with fear and admiration. "Only if we fail," Vasquez replied, her hands moving over the navigation controls with practiced precision. "Dr. Chen, are you ready with the final virus?" "Loaded and primed," the scientist confirmed. "But General, we'll have to deliver it from inside the target's neural center. Our ship won't survive the direct consciousness contact." Vasquez nodded grimly. "That's why we're not planning to survive it. We're planning to succeed." The Indomitable penetrated the command organism's biohull through a combination of reality anchors that temporarily convinced the creature's defenses they didn't exist and probability fields that made its immune responses target empty space instead of the approaching human vessel. Inside the massive bioship's core, General Vasquez found herself face to face with something that challenged every assumption about existence itself. The Shuttle command consciousness